eyes spoke a ward of force. The impling exploded in a ball of flame that spiraled away and burst against a wall in a shower of angry sparks. Before the fires faded, the cripple was away along the street, stick tapping frantically upon the stone. Asmira let the soiled knife fall to the ground. She turned and walked back to her bag, crouched, loosened its ties, and removed a second silver dagger. Flipping it in her fingers, she looked back along the road. The baker was a long way off now, head down, rags flying, lolloping and bounding, swinging himself forward with great sweeps of his stick. In a few more steps, he would be at a corner and out of sight. Asmira took careful aim. Shortly after dawn the following day, those emerging from their houses on the corner of English Spice Streets made a gruesome discovery. 4 bodies sitting neatly against a wall, their 7 legs stretched out side by side into the road. Each man had been a well-known slaver and vagrant of the district. Each had been killed with a single strike. At roughly the same moment, a camel train of 30 riders set out from Eilat's central square on a long journey to Jerusalem. Asmira was among them. Chapter 11. I joined Beza in the incident. It was his turn to keep watch, but his spot in Cyprus was a tad too comfy. What with the noonday heat and the smell of resin and the nice plump implet he was using as a cushion. Dozing gently, Beza didn't notice Solomon's approach. This took some doing, partly because the king was pretty tall, and partly because he was accompanied by 7 magicians, 9 court officials, 11 slaves, 33 warriors, and a robust percentage of his 700 wives. The rustling of their robes alone made a noise like a storm-lashed forest. And since on top of this you had the officials shouting at the slaves waving their palm leaves, the warriors rattling their swords, and the wives squabbling continuously in a dozen languages, Solomon and his entourage were hard to miss. So even without Beza, the rest of the temple workforce managed to stop in time, which left just me. Thing was, I was at the end of the line. I was the one hefting each half-ton block out of the quarry, chucking it into the air, catching it by a corner on an outstretched finger, spinning it stylishly, and then punting it onto Tivok, who was waiting by the temple. Tivok would then pass the block onto Nimshik, Fakwal, Khosroes, or one of the other jinn who were hovering around the uncompleted walls in a variety of outlandish guises. Most of them winged. Fakwal's leathery, Khosroes feathery, and Nimshik's a shimmer with the silver scales of the flying fish. Xoxum, as ever, had to be different. He bounded up and down beside the porch on a pair of giant frog's legs, which meant that most of his blocks were hopelessly out of true. After that, it would toss into position, a hasty aligning spell, and Solomon's temple was a block nearer completion. It took about 35 seconds, quarry to wall top. Lovely. A work rate any employer would be chuffed with. Except Solomon, that is. No. He didn't want it done like that. Never knows why he was so fussy about this temple job. Early in his reign, his host of spirits had jerry-built most of Jerusalem for him, throwing up new housing districts in a day or two, hiding their slapdash workmanship with strategically placed illusions. They'd spent a bit longer on the palace itself, admittedly, and the city walls only wobbled if you pushed really hard. But this temple, Solomon wanted done without any magical sleights of hand, which in my view kind of defeated the point of using jinn. You'll notice that conditions at the building site had altered markedly since the first few days. Back then, with Kaaba and Gezeri close at hand, we'd been doing everything painstakingly while keeping human form. But then things changed. Perhaps reassured by our compliance and with the temple now progressing well, the magician stopped visiting the site so often. Shortly afterward, Gezeri departed too. To begin with, through fear of the flail, we remained on our best behavior. On the second day, still left to our own devices, our resolve wavered. We took a swift vote among ourselves, and by a majority of 6 to 2, approved a change of work practices with immediate effect. Tivok and Khosroes voted against. Tivok because of a complicated argument involving certain subtleties in Clause 51C of his summoning, cause Ruiz because he was just plain chicken. We promptly set up our lookout and spent our time in a mixture of loafing, gambling, imp-tossing, and philosophical debate. Occasionally, when we needed the exercise, we'd whip a few stones magically into position just to make it look like we'd been doing something. It was a definite improvement in our daily grind. Unfortunately, it was during one of these brief spasms of activity that Solomon, having never chosen to visit us before, decided